Today at 6, violent clashes between students and police during a mass protest at Westminster. Some protesters attacked Conservative Party headquarters as police struggled to contain the crowd. Thousands had gathered to protest against higher tuition fees, but student leaders say their protest was hijacked.
I'm utterly disgusted and appalled of the actions of a small minority to try and jeopardise this event.
Earlier, a big crowd had protested peacefully against the government's plans as Labour accused the Lib Dems of a broken promise.
This is about him going along with a Tory plan to shove the cost of higher education onto students and their families.
Maybe she will go out to the students who are protesting outside now and explain what on earth her policy is.
We'll have the latest from Westminster, and this is the scene right now where that protest is coming to an end after 5 hours. Also on tonight's programme, the uncertain outlook as the Bank of England warns that inflation will stay higher than predicted. 8 years after the fatal crash at Potters Bar, Network Rail and Jarvis Rail are to be prosecuted. On the Great Wall, David Cameron urges the Chinese to embrace political reform and more open government. And the Harry Potter stars, a decade on, as their latest film is about to be released.
And in the northwest, taking the lead, Liverpool tackles dangerous dogs, but careful owners could find themselves in trouble too. And the mystery illness which has blinded this girl in a matter of weeks.
Good evening and welcome to BBC News at 6. Thousands of students have clashed with police at Westminster today during a mass demonstration against plans to increase university tuition fees in England. Some protesters converged on the building where the Conservative Party has its main offices, setting fire to placards and some of them smashing windows. Student leaders have condemned the violence. Our correspondent Tom Simons was there and he's just sent us this report.
The doorstep of the Conservative Party's headquarters. Just 1 week after the government announced its plans for the future of universities. The Millbank building was on the route of today's march and it was besieged. At the front, a small, seemingly uncoordinated group of protesters was intent on fighting the police. But behind them, a crowd of thousands was refusing to move.
This standoff's been going on for some time now. It looks as though there are people way inside the Millbank building behind me on different floors. Fire extinguishers are being fired from higher levels and items dropped on the police below.
It wasn't long before they were on the roof, inside the lobby, smashing down doors and hunting for other entrances.
Some of the windows got taken down, so people went in to try and kind of take the space, really kind of make our point that, you know, we're not going to put up with our universities, our education, our general society being treated like this.
The lunchtime march itself had been peaceful. When it turned violent, this was the response of the student union president.
50,000 students have come to protest peacefully and they've made a serious point. But they are in jeopardy of being completely undermined by the outrageous and violent actions of a small minority.
Most of those watching what was going on here today did not condone it, but did regard it as an understandable reaction to the government's proposals.
I think the point has been got across that a lot of people are very angry about this.
The violence has gone a bit too far, but I think it's quite exciting to know that so many students are willing to stand up and make their voices heard.
It feels like the days of kind of Thatcher are back now. You've got the budget cuts and now you've got the riots.
But this was not expected to be a violent protest. Scotland Yard said relatively small numbers of officers were on hand, around 225.
We did, as we always do, plan for this event in order to police it proportionately with the indications from the organisers and from all the other information available to us. And we were planning today for a peaceful demonstration, and we remain very disappointed that some people have chosen not to protest peacefully.
Tonight, 10 people have been injured, 3 of them police officers. But the police are regaining control of the area. Tom Simons, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, today's demonstration with some of the placards accusing Nick Clegg of betrayal brings into sharp focus the tensions right at the heart of the coalition. Lib Dem MPs who promised to oppose any rise in tuition fees are now being threatened with a possible electoral challenge from the National Union of Students. But Mr Clegg, Lib Dem leader of course and Deputy Prime Minister, told MPs today that the plans offered a fair deal for students. Our political correspondent Rita Chakrabarti has this report.
Tuition fees were always going to be a toxic subject for the Lib Dems. Raising them is a joint coalition decision. But for Nick Clegg, it means turning his previous policy on its head. Today in the Commons, Labour sensed his weakness. Their own policy is still in development. But that didn't stop them firing no fewer than 12 questions at the Lib Dem leader.
He's pulling the plug on public funding and dumping the cost onto students. Isn't that why he's betraying his promise on tuition fees?
She agrees, we all agree across all sides of this House, that graduates should make some contribution for the benefit of going to university. The question is how? We have a progressive plan. She has no plan whatsoever.
For many on this march, it's the Lib Dems they've got in their sights. Their protests driven by a strong sense of betrayal at the party that said it would scrap tuition fees, not nearly treble them. Fees are now around £3,000, but will go up to £6,000. And universities will be able to charge up to £9,000 in exceptional circumstances. Their funding is being cut by 40%, with teaching grants all but wiped out, except for science and maths. During the election, Lib Dems promised not to raise fees, including their leader.
To raise the cap on tuition fees is wrong. We will resist, vote against, campaign against any lifting of that cap.
One Lib Dem who will vote against a rise says the protest will remind his colleagues of how controversial this is.
Many of us also will have seen the protests on the streets and be reminded that this is an issue that matters not just to young people, not just to today's students, but to lots of people across the country who see the future of our education system as being terribly important.
Thousands of miles from Westminster on his tour of China, David Cameron found himself being grilled on the issue by a student there.
The UK is one of the favorite destinations for overseas study for Chinese students. But recently the tuition fee is raised, which may probably prevent some excellent students.
Last night, protesters held a vigil outside Nick Clegg's house. Tonight, the National Union of Students says it'll try to force by-elections in constituencies where Lib Dems break their promises. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, Laura Koonsberg is at the scene of today's protest for us. We can join her now. Laura, lots of questions to ask, obviously about the degree of the violence, but also to what extent the police were properly prepared for this demonstration today.
Well, I think clearly this demonstration today took the police by surprise, and politicians too. The extent and scale was not what they had been expecting. And in the last few minutes, the Commissioner of the Met, Sir Paul Stevenson, has said that the police should have been more prepared for the level of violence. And what happened here today was unacceptable and an embarrassment. Now, no surprise, perhaps there are still some protesters here. I just want to explain to you exactly what is happening right now. Over my shoulder in the reception area of 30 Millbank, the ringleaders and the protesters who were on the roof of the building are being detained by police as they try to move on those people who are still here at the demonstration. But even as the debris of this protest begins to be swept away, the police do their best to calm this situation down and to end it. There is a political problem for the Liberal Democrats that will not be easily brushed away. Tonight, sources close to Nick Clegg say there is no wriggle room. It would be a mistake for them to change their course of action. But clearly, for the Lib Dems and the coalition, the resistance to the change of tuition fees is going to be an ongoing problem.
Indeed, Laura, thank you very much. Laura Koonsberg there for us on Millbank in central London. The Bank of England has warned that the outlook for the UK economy remains highly uncertain. The bank's governor, Mervyn King, forecast that inflation next year will be slightly higher than previously expected, but said the recovery was likely to continue. Adding to the uncertainty are the government spending cuts, which could have a big impact, not least on the construction industry. Our chief economics correspondent, Hugh Pym, has more details.
There's plenty for the Bank of England to think about right now. Inflation higher than expected, the impact of spending cuts, world trade tensions, so uncertainty is very much the order of the day.
The uncertainty faced by the committee, with this assessment of the uncertainties, we can't be sure which of the big risks to the outlook will materialise.
On the one hand, rising prices at the tills for items like food are set to keep inflation high throughout next year. On the other, if consumers are worried about government spending cuts, they might tighten their belts, so hitting growth. And the bank's really worried that world leaders won't bury their differences over trade and currencies at this week's summit.
Given the difficult and dangerous times that the world economy is in, that the world leaders at G20 have a constructive approach. We are in a position where the world economy can be a win-win outcome, but I'm afraid we're also in a position where it can be a lose-lose.
The message from the bank is that world trade is extremely important for growth prospects here. If it keeps up the momentum, that's got to be good news for exporters and will encourage them to expand production and recruit more staff. But any clouds on the international trading horizon could have serious implications for businesses here. Certainly the mood is sweet at this company. The jam manufacturer Wilkin, based in Essex, is accelerating on the back of growing international demand. Exports are up 10% over the last year, and it's invested in new production machinery. The company's fortunes depend very much on other economies.
Well, what's encouraging is that the traditional markets, so the Germany, the France, America, they are showing very decent growth on core products, but we're also seeing some new countries coming into the fold. So we're working in China, working in Brazil, so it's a bit of both areas are doing well.
Whether it's companies like that or policymakers in the city, they're hoping the outlook at home and abroad continues to brighten. But seeing through the economic mist and charting the best way forward, as the Bank of England has confirmed today, seems as hard as ever. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Criminal proceedings have been launched against Network Rail and the maintenance company Jarvis Rail in connection with the rail crash at Potters Bar back in 2002. Earlier this year, an inquest jury returned verdicts of accidental death for the 7 victims and decided there had been failures of inspection or maintenance of the set of points that caused the derailment. Our transport correspondent Richard Scott reports.
This is what a few loose or missing bolts can do. And this was the moment that cost 7 people their lives. The train had left London's King's Cross on its way to King's Lynn. 10 minutes later, it was approaching Potters Bar station and passed over the faulty set of points. The train derailed and the rear carriage flew into the air and onto the platform. The Crown Prosecution Service decided a prosecution for gross negligence manslaughter was unlikely to be successful. So now the regulator is beginning criminal proceedings over the crash using health and safety legislation.
It's not second best. The corporate manslaughter considerations are completely different. The test there is gross negligence, whereas the test under the Health and Safety at Work Act is more a systemic failure in terms of the system. So I certainly don't think it's correct to categorise it as being second best.
The case is slightly odd because both parties being prosecuted for the crash no longer really exist. The private contractor, Jarvis Rail, went into administration earlier this year. And Railtrack, which was in charge of the infrastructure at the time, has also collapsed. Network Rail took over its responsibilities and its liabilities. And it's not the first time that this has happened. Railtrack was in charge during the Ladbroke Grove crash, which killed 31 people. Network Rail got the £4 million fine. The Hatfield crash also happened on Railtrack's watch, but again, Network Rail was fined, in this case, £3.5 million. And now it faces a potentially unlimited fine for Potters Bar. The rail unions have claimed that job cuts risk dragging us back to the time of these crashes. But Network Rail argues that the changes it's made means the railways are safer than they've ever been. Richard Scott, BBC News.
The Scottish Government's plan for a minimum price on alcohol was rejected today by the Scottish Parliament. The proposal was part of the SNP's alcohol bill. The Health Secretary Nicola Sturgeon said that rejecting the plan was a sad day for the Scottish Parliament. She accused her opponents of crude party politics. Well, to make sense of it, let's talk to our Scotland correspondent Glenn Campbell, who's at Holyrood. Glenn, where does this leave then, the package of reforms that they were trying to put through?
heavily watered down, Hugh. This was supposed to be life-saving legislation, blazing a trail for the UK. The Scottish Government wanted to make retailers charge no less than 45 pence per unit of alcohol, increasing the cost of strong, cheap booze, and they hoped decreasing consumption of alcohol among problem drinkers. Doctors and police chiefs backed them. Their political opponents did not. They said minimum alcohol pricing would punish responsible drinkers on a budget and increase profits for supermarkets. So Parliament has voted down this plan. Other measures do survive, such as a ban on promotions like 3 bottles of wine for a tenner, but nobody's pretending that alone will end Scotland's hard drinking culture.
Glenn, many thanks for the update. Glenn Campbell there for us in the Scottish Parliament. Now, the time is 6:15. Our main story tonight. Students protesting against higher tuition fees in England have clashed with police in central London. Some managed to break into the building that houses the Conservative Party offices. Coming up. A decade on, the latest Harry Potter offering is released this week. We'll be asking, can this really be the end for the wizard and his friends?
And in North West tonight at 6:30, standing on ceremony, Cheshire Towns turn out to salute the Mercian Regiment. And blown off course and into the limelight, the rare bird who has got the North West twitchers twitching.
Now, David Cameron, who's on a visit to China, has underlined the link between democracy and economic progress. The Prime Minister told university students in Beijing that it wasn't his job to lecture the Chinese government, but he insisted that political reform, an open media and the rule of law provided the best path, in his view, to stability and prosperity. Our political editor, Nick Robinson, is travelling with the Prime Minister. He sent us this report.
When they grow up, will they get the right to choose their own leaders? Today, these young Chinese met the British Prime Minister and talked to him not about democracy, but about how every person should combat climate change.
Mr. Cameron, yes. I saw pictures of riding a bike to work. I do really admire you for this.
I can't do it anymore now. They won't let me. I have to go in a car. It's very sad.
They showed him China's Great Wall, a reminder that for centuries this country was one of the world's great powers. Today, David Cameron came to see China's past, extending back thousands of years, covering hundreds of millions of people. But he came here to talk about China's future. In a speech to students at Peking University, the Prime Minister didn't dare call for democracy here, but he went about as close as he dared.
The rise in economic freedom in China in recent years has been hugely beneficial to China and to the world. I hope that in time this will lead to a greater political opening, because I'm convinced that the best guarantor of prosperity and stability is for economic and political progress to go in step together.
If he hadn't been there, he told them, he would have been facing Prime Minister's questions. A strong opposition, strong courts and a strong media made Britain, he said, a stronger country. But one questioner seemed to want him to be more explicit.
What suggestions can you give to the Chinese Communist Party to handle the relationship between the country and the party? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Diplomatically, he swerved well clear of answering that one. But these Chinese students soon proved they're not any easier to handle than students back at home.
The British Prime Minister's speech.
After the speech, I asked some in the audience what they'd made of their distinguished guest's message to China. Is that good for China, democracy?
Well, this is a quite hard problem for us to answer. But as our Premier Win said, Chinese people are always pursuing freedom, democracy, and happiness.
China has a population of 1.3 billion, and that's a really big problem. And indeed, different countries have different ways of solving its problem.
Like them, Chinese TV news preferred the Prime Minister's praise for their country. This bulletin totally ignored his speech. China's national anthem calls on this country to stand up. David Cameron says they are now on the world stage. But are they listening to him? Nick Robinson, BBC News, Beijing.
It's one of the world's most modern hospitals. It houses Europe's largest critical care unit. Now the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Birmingham has become the main treatment centre for Britain's wounded soldiers. Our defence correspondent Caroline Wyatt has been given exclusive access to the facility. We can join Caroline now.
Well, Hugh, you join us here on that critical care ward, now Europe's largest, ultra-modern, light and airy, 100 beds and patients in all can come in here. And the medical staff, like the patients, are a mix of military personnel and civilians. And we've been able to follow the progress of some of the patients from the front line in Helmand to their care here in Birmingham. An RAF TriStar taxis to a halt, carrying a casualty from the front line in Helmand.
Ready, steady, slide.
Military and civilian medical staff gently move the injured soldier into a waiting ambulance.
He sustained severe injuries with an IED blast within the last 48 hours. He's intubated, ventilated, and we'll be taking him to intensive care at Birmingham Hospital for ongoing surgery later on today.
The ambulance rushes the soldier to the new Queen Elizabeth Hospital. It's close to the old Selly Oak, where Britain's wounded have long been treated. But now there's a brand new building with ultra-modern facilities. Specialists from every discipline are in one place, and that's crucial when every second counts. Some, like Sue Jeffries, have also worked at the field hospital at Camp Bastion in Afghanistan. But even for the nurses, the initial extent of some of the young military patients' injuries can be hard to deal with emotionally.
When you see someone who's only 17, 18 years old badly injured, it can affect you, but I would expect that to affect anyone. We just have to give them the best care that we can.
23-year-old Andrew Garthwaite had his arm blown off in Helmand Province around 6 months ago.
I've been treated like you would at a five-star hotel. I just cannot believe how much the army has done for me and my family and girlfriend and friends and everybody I know, really.
And the same with your other...
Andrew is discussing having a new bionic arm fitted, which he hopes means he can continue his army career. He's one of 105 amputees from the campaign in Helmand, most of whom owe their lives to the care and treatment from the medical staff here in Birmingham and on the front line. Well, we can't name him for reasons of patient confidentiality, but we have been told by the staff here that the patient you saw being medevaced out of Helmand and brought here did survive his operation. He is now recovering, one of the many injured service people who've come here from Helmand, and thanks to medical advances and the care available at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital have pulled through. Hugh.
Caroline in Birmingham, thank you very much. 3 former Labour MPs accused of expenses fraud have lost their final legal attempt to avoid a criminal trial to have their cases judged by Parliament. The UK Supreme Court ruled that Jim Devine, David Chater and Elliot Morley should all face criminal proceedings. They deny the charges. A former presenter of the BBC One's Country File is accusing the BBC of age and sex discrimination after she lost her job on the programme. Miriam O'Reilly, who's 53, was one of several female presenters who lost their jobs on the show ahead of its move to a primetime Sunday evening slot. Day, a former controller of BBC One, has been giving her account of what happened, as John Brain reports.
But Phytophthora doesn't just attack one species.
Miriam O'Reilly was a familiar face on the BBC's Country File programme for nearly a decade. But was she dropped because she wasn't famous enough, or because she wasn't young enough? 53-year-old Miss O'Reilly has told an employment tribunal that in the months leading up to her losing her role, comments were made about her wrinkles. She alleges one manager even suggested maybe it was time for Botox. When Country File was moved from Sunday mornings to a peak time evening slot, it was relaunched with a generally younger on-screen team. But today's hearing was told presenters such as Matt Baker and Julia Bradbury were chosen because they were high profile. They were recognised and appreciated by viewers. The outgoing controller of BBC One, Jay Hunt, said it hadn't been her decision to axe Miss O'Reilly, but it was clear that although a talented reporter, she was completely unknown to the peak time audience. Her age and sex were irrelevant.
Jay Hunt described the allegations made here as categorically untrue and utterly offensive on every level. She said as a 43-year-old woman herself, the last thing she'd ever do is discriminate on the grounds of gender or age. But this tribunal has reopened the whole debate on how older women are treated on television in general and by the BBC in particular.
You have the posture of Daniel Craig.
Last year, the corporation was criticised for replacing 66-year-old Strictly Come Dancing judge Arlene Phillips with Alicia Dixon, who's less than half her age.
First and foremost, a surfboard.
Miriam O'Reilly says the BBC hasn't offered her any work at all since Countryfile. John Brain, BBC News, Central London.
Now, for millions of Harry Potter fans worldwide, tomorrow brings the opening of the final chapter in the Wizard saga, or at least it's been billed as the final chapter. The fans, of course, are hoping it's not the end. The world premiere of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 takes place tomorrow night. Part 2 is due for release sometime next summer. Our entertainment correspondent, Lizo Mazimba, has been talking to the big names.
They are coming. It's the beginning of the end for the stars of the Potter series. Since their first outing on the big screen, it's not just their physical appearance that's changed. Movie magic has transformed Daniel Radcliffe, Emma Watson and Rupert Grint into three of the most famous faces on the planet.
I've really enjoyed working with everyone I've got the chance to work with. I was given this mind-blowing opportunity at the age of 11.
And their reaction when filming on the series finally finished this summer?
It just felt like the end of a world.
Hard to kind of adjust, really, because it's been such a huge kind of part of my life.
If you could give your 10-year-old self any particular advice about how to cope with the next decade, what would you tell him?
I suppose I'd just say to myself everything that my parents said to me, which was that never read anything about yourself and never go on the internet and look at yourself and all that stuff, because that is ultimately what will send you round the bend.
And all three believe it's been a life-changing experience.
I'm kind of ready to kind of move on. It's kind of a good time.
I'm excited to see what the world has in store for me next.
10 years is a long time, and it's now, I'm ready to walk away.
You really don't stand a chance. A sad time for millions of fans who'll have to do the same when the final movie is released next summer. Lizo Mazimba, BBC News.
Now, some very important weather news tonight. Here's Laura.
Yes, you're right. We've had a rather nice day of weather today thanks to a weak ridge of high pressure, but it's set to change dramatically thanks to this low driving in as we head through the next 24 hours. Now, for the first part of the night, it's clear and dry with a touch of frost developing under clear skies, but behind me, we will soon have a band of rain set in, and we're already warning for this band of rain to be very heavy, an inch of rain or more, perhaps across parts of Scotland. And as that rain arrives, it will turn to snow across the high ground of Scotland. A very wet rush hour for much of England and Wales tomorrow. Our very heavy, blustery band of rain pushes through, and more blustery downpours across the northwest of Scotland and Northern Ireland. From this rain, yet again, we could have another inch falling throughout the afternoon, accompanied by strong gusty winds. And after a wet start across Wales and the southwest of England tomorrow, yes, the main rain band will move through. Yes, despite the sunshine, but it will be very, very windy throughout the afternoon. Squally winds follow on with some very heavy downpours across the southeast corner of England throughout tomorrow afternoon. A lot of spray on the roads from this. And yes, the rain band moving away from the Midlands and northern England, but there will be more rain here as we head on into the evening, accompanied by even stronger winds. The strongest winds tomorrow, northern England, North Wales, southern Scotland will have some disruption from these, no doubt. Gusts of 60, 70, maybe 80 miles an hour in exposure to those southwesterly winds. So we are expecting severe gales for many western areas of the UK tomorrow. Thankfully, though, Friday, a brief respite. Showers in the north, feeling cooler. Cloudy in the rain in the south. But we are watching out for very stormy weather tomorrow.
All right, we've been warned. Thank you very much. Nearly 6:30. It's time to join our news teams where you are. Bye for now.